Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's video. Today I have Mr. Rahul Zutshi with me. Hi, Rahul.
Hi, Vaibhav. How are you?
Good. Thank you. So Rahul is the founder for Zohort. Rahul is an NIT Hamidpur pass out who did his MBA from IIM Indore. Before Zohort, he has had leadership positions in marketing and strategy at various startups. So again, welcome to the video, Rahul.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Vaibhav. Thank you so much.
Rahul,
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Rahul, can you quickly run us through your background, what you have done educationally and then professionally?
Interesting. So I'll just take a couple of minutes on it. So as you mentioned, I graduated from NIT Hamidpur, and my first three and a half years were when I started off. I actually started off coding. So I was a coder. I was a techie. What I did essentially was I used to work in embedded system with a firm called ST Microelectronics. In a simply fashionable way, which I say to everyone is, the chips that I designed ended up in the likes of, Mercedes, Ferrari, BMWs of the world. So that is what I did for about 3 years in a firm called ST Microelectronics. That's when the MBA happened to me. It was something that happened to me rather than as a choice. So yeah, I did my MBA from IIM Indore, which was really good couple of years that I had. The crowd there was really amazing. It helped me pull up. Post which I spent about year and a half just trying to figure out what I really want to do. So my first campus which happened was with Cognizant Business Consulting. So while the firm was good, the culture was good, they give you all the independence, but this is not something that I really wanted to do. I always thought that I could do something better with whatever I've gained, right? So about year into it, I realized, although I had a choice to move to London and kickstart my consulting career there, I decided to stay back, and I decided to jump into the bandwagon of startups. At that point of time, they were just kicking off, right? So this is where I joined a firm called Ameo. That was my first stint into a business type of a role where in a software industry. Although I had some background of software embedded and so on and so forth, but a real business role started here. My first 2-3 years here were really amazing, and the role essentially is in these days is fashionably called either the chief of staff or EA to CEO's office or CEO's office kind of a role. But what eventually happens in a startup is you end up doing anything and everything under the sun, right? So it became a fairly common thing that whatever is not done by anyone in the company would be done by Rahul. So it was a really good, interesting 2-3 years directly working with founders, getting into CEO's shoes, how they make those decisions, what are the problems that they are facing. So I did right from marketing to strategy to product to services to hiring to scaling up teams to everything under the sun, right? Those 3 years, finance, funding, and so on, handling critical customers, everything under the sun. And each day, quote unquote, me and my friends used to call it "Kya aaj kuch tufani karte hain" types used to happen. So a really amazing first 3 years, and it gave me an overall understanding of the business, all the levers of the business. How do you think about things? I later transitioned into a role which was more of a GTM oriented role, where although I was responsible for marketing and SDR teams across the globe. So it was a 30-40 member team I was responsible for. My role essentially here was to enable a GTM engine across the geographies that Ameo at that point of time was targeting. So this was, this again I did for about 3 years. We did some experiments, but the focus essentially was emerging geography. So my exposure into a lot of GTM activities in Africa, Middle East, APAC, actually happened in this time frame. I've not traveled to Europe, I've not traveled to US, but I've still traveled to 20-25 countries. So this can tell you the exposure into these countries. So before Corona hit, and at that point of time, I was thinking, what next and so on and so forth. And I was very, very open up with my founders at that point of time. I always wanted to do US. If in specific terms, if you're doing SaaS and you're not the US, nothing's happening, right? So I got that opportunity in a firm called Haptic, which is a part of Geo Platforms. This again, although the role was marketing, but goal essentially was to make sure that you start a GTM engine focused on US and then stabilize the engine that is already available in the markets that we are present in. So picked up that particular role, did that for a year. It was really, really amazing times, right at the beginning. In fact, there's a story that I tell everyone is when I started talking to the management of Aptic, everything was all right. There was nothing out there in the world. When I actually got an offer and I decided to move on, things had started to happen in China, and we used to joke about it. And by the time I joined, world had turned upside down. So that is what happened with me. And next 1 year, for that matter, was an amazing ride where we at that point need to figure out how do you actually start an engine of GTM without having all the levers that you had learned in the past. Right? So there was nothing working at that point of time, and we were able to make sure that at least we have a kickstart in the GTM engine for US. This was about a year, for that matter, and post which I decided to start something of my own. We'll talk about that a little later. But my entrepreneurship journey started about year and a half back. So that has been my short and sweet stint across the board. But focus essentially has been mid-market enterprise sales across emerging and developed geographies. Yes.
Fantastically explained. Especially Rahul, the way you explained the chief of staff role. Let's talk about a very general question to begin with, Rahul. So a lot of time, how do you differentiate sales and marketing, right? Right. How do you define the context, for a B2C business? What is most relevant? If you could talk in general about sales or marketing, I think that will clear up a lot of our heads around where the lines are.
Interesting. So see, if I have to explain this in very simple words and which is easily understandable, I'm not talking about the roles here, but I am talking about the general understanding of people here. If I put it this way, the role of the marketing essentially is to make sure that people get into your buying bucket. Okay, and the role of the sales essentially is to make sure that they buy. Okay, in very simple terms, obviously there are complications within if you think about those things, and let's try to break it down one by one. So what do you do to get people aware in the marketing standpoint, right? At least you're out there, your product is something that is useful for a lot of audiences. What do you do? So there are other elements to it. You generate content, you do a lot of digital marketing, you might do partner events, you might do events, your SEO, jazz, and so on and so forth, right? So there are multiple elements, and I kind of break it down marketing into two types of marketing, right? There is a left brain and the right brain, right? Simple. The one type of marketer needs to understand maths behind it, to understand the funnel, and so on. So the other side of the brain needs to be a little creative to understand really how to pull people into it. And both these functions as a marketer need to combine and think of it en masse. Okay? But sales, if you think about sales for that matter, once somebody is in that bucket, then you have to drive sometimes in most of the context that we'll talk about sales through one-on-one conversations. This is where your negotiation skills, convincing skills, trying to make sure that customer understands the value of what you are trying to drive rather than selling. Okay, and we'll talk about this in a while. Selling has a lot of bad name for that matter, but it essentially means that you are trying to help someone do something or achieve something. Okay, rather than selling. I prefer not to use the word selling, right? So so in that context, there are multiple roles and multiple career opportunities out there. But in general, if you think sales is on the top, where you try to get people aware about your product through multiple means, and then marketing is this, and sales is all about driving and converting them and making sure your products are bought.
Right. Thank you for sharing that, Rahul. Rahul, now that we've discussed this, can you give us a top-down approach of understanding of sales, like different nuances of sales, what all functions are there, how do you differentiate? A lot of jargons we hear around B2B, B2C. If you can tell us a bit about.
Interesting. So, see, again, I'll try to break this down into 2 or 3 parts. And sales is there are a lot of different type of ways in which companies sell things, right? They sell it digitally, they sell it one-on-one, they sell it distribution channels, they sell it on their shops and retail and so on. So there are a lot of ways, right? And I'll try to differentiate sales into 3 or 4 types of sales, okay? And then we'll try to nuance it into a few things which I think, make sense, okay? The first is, obvious. And when I used to be in IIM and MBA colleges in general, for that matter, a lot of companies used to come and say, we have sales profile. And typically these FMCGs and electronic good companies and so on and so forth, right? They have sales profile. And they used to put it more as a marketing, but at the end of the day, it used to be sales, right? So typically said, what does this mean? These type of sales in traditional industries were more distribution led. Okay, so there used to be a distributor and there used to be a retailer and so on and so forth. Your job as sitting here would be to make sure that you enable them in some shape or form. That is one type of sales. Okay, now there is another type of sales which is not distribution led, but which is more one-on-one. It can be something like an insurance these days, edtech for that matter. This is a lot of one-on-one. This is typically what I call as velocity or commoditized sales for that matter. What eventually ends up happening in this particular case is you need to be really methodical with respect to how you do things, right? For example, in simple terms, if you need to make 100 calls a day, you need to make 100 calls a day, right? So if you keep doing it over a period of time, you would realize that somebody who does it methodically, he will do much better than a lot of other people who are not methodical. So velocity becomes important, and a lot of edtech companies have kind of evangelized it in some cases, right? So not to the liking of a lot of people, as we know, but yes, it has been successful for them in some shape or form, right? That is one. It is very closer to, if you think of this now, this is very closer to insurance sales, right? And I interned with insurance, and I had a first-hand experience of what insurance sales looks like, both in agency and bank assurance models. And I realized that type of sales is very closer to what edtech copied and kind of digitized it in some shape or form, right? This is more B2C led. Okay, a lot of it sales which people don't understand, which people don't see specifically when they're starting off their career, is B2B. Right. Okay, which essentially means enterprises selling to enterprises. Okay, it is only, in fact, a lot of people, I speak to a lot of freshers these days as a part of my job. A lot of people do not even understand what B2B is when they start off their career. It is only when they have spent some time, a couple of years into sales, specifically in banking roles, insurance roles, edtech, obviously these roles, and so on and so forth. That is when they realize that possibly they can make a career out of B2B, which is much better, right? And this type of sales within B2B, for that matter, in simple terms, B2B, everybody understands, is enterprises selling to enterprises, right? But what they don't understand is there are nuances within B2B also, right? So you can sell a B2B product for $10. You can sell B2B product for a $10 billion. So it is as complicated as that. And I use this example a lot when I coach you can make a B2B sale by just putting it out on a web page, or you can make it as complicated as Indian government buying Rafael jets from France. Okay, so but to cut it and try to explain these things, let's try and understand this from 3 points or 3 different perspectives. Okay, the first perspective essentially is your ticket size. What is the average value of the deal? Okay, the higher the deal goes, the complicated the decision making will happen. Complicated decision making in that deal, as I explained, Rafael is a very common example that I give everyone these days. The higher the ticket size, the more time it's going to close. It's going to take to close that particular deal, and more importantly, the higher the ticket size, the more value of a one-on-one interaction and one-on-one convincing and maneuverability in an organization becomes. Okay, so typically, if you see this kind of threshold starts at somewhere around $20,000-$25,000 a year, give or take. If that is your deal size, typically you would need a one-on-one interaction and one-on-one selling. Okay. Now within this also, there are the second element which I was talking about was there are again two types of selling. Obviously, one, as I mentioned, is on the ticket side. The second is which we call as hunting and farming.
Right.
In simple terms, a lot of people don't understand this, and possibly I've seen confused faces when I use these terms. So I don't use these terms in my general language. So one is called new account acquisition, and the other is farming, which essentially is account management, or these days in SaaS is also called. Okay, so what it essentially means is onboarding a new account and getting the customer to renew and cross-sell, upsell your new products, new product lines to their existing customers for that matter. Both of these have different types of approaches. In one, obviously, you need to find people who are ready to buy and then try to convince them to buy, obviously. And the second essentially is having those deeper discussions with these guys to make sure that with your existing customers, that they are successful, right? So these are two different type of approaches, two different type of sales approaches, two different type of this. I heard from few people, for that matter, that they don't even consider customer success sales, which is not true. I think customer success is closer to sales rather than anything else. Okay, and if you go a little deeper, then third type is what type of audiences are you selling to, and that is where people start to build their careers slowly and steadily. Okay, so for example, if you're doing sales in Middle East, you kind of get tagged over there. If you're doing sales in India, you get tagged. Okay, this is a regional sales, right? India and so on and so forth. Then you get tagged into not only regions, you also get tagged into the kind of audiences that you are selling to over a period of time in the early stages, right? So, for example, if you're making sales to you would work very closely with banks and selling them, that you become a bank sales kind of a person, right? And you kind of over a period of time you gain that reputation. So these are the three things. But to be very honest, I think in the first, when somebody's starting their career, important thing to understand is the ticket size bit as well as the hunting and farming kind of roles. These are two different types of roles.
Right. I think that sums it up. Rahul, I have a direct question for you here. That is, so a lot of times what I've realized people do is after working for a couple of years in sales, they realize that they are not a salesperson. On the other hand, I know of a friend, who was an engineer, did it from a pretty good college, worked in engineering for a couple of years, but then realized that that's not his cup of tea. Started with sales and hence done wonderfully well with sales. So is there a litmus test that you use or people can use on themselves to figure out if they are natural at sales, if they're going to be really successful at sales or not?
Interesting. So I'll break this down into two parts, okay? And when people are, interestingly for that matter, and when people are starting off their career, the awareness of sales as a career and sales as a role is not there. Okay, it has been deep rooted within our systems and within our education, for that matter. Even now, for that matter, if I talk to MBA grads, people want to move into investment banking, people want to move into product management, and they have this fancy strategy is some type of a role that I want to pick up, right? And so on and so forth. Right? Marketing kind of is better positioned than sales in some cases, even if in a lot of companies actually sell sales roles and marketing roles, which is not true. Now, to answer your question, okay, that awareness at this point of time is not there. But what people more often than not, freshers even after a couple of years of experience, that they don't realize is eventually everything boils down to sales. Sales is a skill for that matter, which has to be your life skill. And even if you're not natural at it, you can learn it over a period of time. Okay. Now, why do I say this? First of all, everybody needs to realize that eventually everything would tail in. Once you go into your career, you would become a salesperson in some shape or form. Whether you are doing it internally, whether you are doing it externally, right? Now, as soon as you get into a managerial role after your stint 4 or 5 years, you need to sell your vision to your people who you are reporting to, right? In case you go up the ladder, you need to convince your second level of leadership. You need to convince your stakeholders, which is very, very close to selling, right? If you're not able to do it, if you're not able to convince your second layer, it would be very difficult for you to execute things on ground, right? So getting that buy-in is important, which is almost equal to sales. In fact, let me put it this way, and you should check it out, right? A lot of people should check it out. A lot of successful CEOs, specifically in the SaaS companies, software companies and technology companies, had their stint in sales. Most of them, for that matter, they had their stint in sales. And people don't realize this, that more often than not, the route to your CEO, CXO, and so on and so forth, it happens through sales.
Through sales, right?
Right. So that is one. So awareness at this point of time in the people who are just graduating or beginning their career and are early professionals is not there, right? So that is one. Now, coming to a second question, which essentially was, how do you know that you're natural at sales or not, for that matter? And this is where we'll talk about Zohort in a bit, but what you don't realize, for that matter, you are selling even before you know you're selling, right? As a child, when you get into teens, for that matter, you have to manage your parents. Once you, what does it mean, manage your parents, for that matter? Are you able to convince them to go out for a movie? Are you able to convince them to go out for a cricket match or watch a match, for that matter, for 30 minutes, which you were not supposed to? Or if you have broken a rule, which essentially was a curfew or something like that, were you able to manage the situation then? Sometimes by not telling them, sometimes by telling them and kind of managing the situation, right? These are all teams, right? At the end of the day, once you grow a little bit, you also need to manage your teachers, professors, right? So if you have not done a homework on time, were you, and teacher asks you whether you've done it or not, how did you manage that situation? Were you able to get out of that situation alive, or were you just screwed there, right? So you need to really understand these simple things, right? Where people are able to convince in some shape or form. Now, how you did it is a separate question, right? Now you grow again, and you are now possibly in college. You have a girlfriend, and you possibly skipped giving her a gift on Valentine's Day. Okay, again a situation to be in. Example, right? And what the hell? I mean, if you are able to get out of it
without buying the gift,
without giving the gift, or without breaking up, so you're still a good sales guy, right? You're able to convince him, right, in some shape or form. Now, you start selling even before you know you are selling, right?
Right.
So a lot of people have a natural flair for it, true, right? But more important than not, what is the litmus test? So what do you think, for that matter? How do you think about what are the 2 or 3 things that I need to know? So here are my 2 or 3 points, okay, which are 3 points, for that matter, which I think are most important. The first essentially is your communication skills. Okay. And when I say communication skills, I don't necessarily mean if you talk sweet English and if you talk Shashi Tharoor in English and so on and so forth. No, that's not true. What communication skills is far more ahead, far more than what we call as language skills. Okay.
Right.
You might be able to sell in your local language. You might be able to sell in English, for that matter. English has become a little important, but it is not as important. So even if you are speaking grammatically correct English, you have to have a lot of other things to communicate well. And more important than anything else, you should be able to listen to customer. So listening skills become more important than your ability to talk, right?
Right.
So
I think
can you able?
that's the most underrated thing. A lot of times people stress too much on speaking and underrate listening. A lot of times what happens in sale is the other way around. If you're able to listen better, you essentially end up becoming a better salesperson than a person who just talks and listens less. Ideally you should have both, but if you were to make a choice, then
I would always prefer a person who listens better, right? So and is able to communicate. Sometimes I've seen those type of people gain more respect in front of the customer. Anyways, that being said, that is your first important part, but that is not the only part. These days, knowingly or unknowingly, people have started to test only communication skills and think that communication skills will translate into sales skills, which is not true. Okay, which is not true to the. So the second part essentially is, and I'll talk to 3 points. The second part is your on the feet thinking. So ability to put someone in a situation and come out of it. And this is what we spoke about, right? It is very natural for a lot of people in any situation. So the situation that you start facing when you are a teen, right? So how were you able to convince your mom that I'll do a homework a little later? Let me go to play out cricket or a football today, right, in the evening. Or in some cases, if you're a little grown up and you have a girlfriend, were you able to manage that situation there, right? So on the feet thinking becomes really important in these particular cases, where people, when they are put in a situation, do they have the ability to come out of it and come out of it alive with flying colors? A lot of people, very few people, if 100 people judge communication skills, only 20 or 10 people judge on the feet thinking when they are taking sales interviews. Okay, of freshers and so on and so forth. They just think just because people spoke confidently and really good English and he had some really awesome, authentic accent, he is a really good salesperson. While if you immediately put him in the situation can be anything, right? So was he able to come out of it alive? Second part. Now, third part is more behavioral than anything else. Okay, and this is what I call as ability to face failure. Now, believe it or not, I mean, everybody has to understand that sales is a target-oriented job, right? You have a monthly target, sometimes a weekly target, sometimes a quarterly target, sometimes a annual target, and so on and so forth, right? And your boss's boss, and his boss, and so on and so forth, would want to make sure that there is money in the bank and there are orders flowing, and so on and so forth. Doesn't matter which company, doesn't matter which industry, right? At the end of the day, top line is important. So in most of the cases, this pressure translates. Are you able to face that pressure? And in case you fail, how do you react? Now, this is the most difficult thing to judge. And the common question that I ask everyone is, what is the single biggest failure of your life, and how do you come out of it? And this kind of gets people talking. Now, this to me, the third point to me, for that matter, is the one that differentiates between an average salesperson and a very successful salesperson. Okay, if somebody has all the three, well and good, communication skills, on the feet thinking, and ability to face failure. But in the long term, I think for that matter, ability to face failure becomes really important. What do you do when customer says no to you? Or what do you do for that matter if he had promised you an order and he eventually backs out? What happens then? How do you react? Is what defines a salesperson in the long run. And I think these are the three important litmus tests that I take whenever I'm recruiting a fresher or an early professional, for that matter. And a lot of people miss out on point 2 and point 3.
Right, very well put. Rahul, 3 points that can help individuals decide, are they going to be natural at sales or not. Thank you for sharing that. Rahul, you talked about numbers in sales. A lot of times they're is a lot of pressure around, on salespeople. So can you, share a bit more about what is the number pressure, what is the burnout in sales? Because the kind of pressure that salespeople get is essentially the highest that anyone in the company
Yes.
faces, after the CEO. So if you can talk about that a bit.
I think that is the reality of sales, as I mentioned, right? So eventually, if you are in sales, you have to deliver those numbers. For people who are just entering into sales, these can be lead matrices like generating appointments, generating qualified meetings, and when you grow and you carry that quota for that matter, at that point of time, you have to realize that you have to actually deliver orders. Okay, now. The reality of life with sales essentially is you live your life by a month or a quarter, whatever quota you have, right? And uh, eventually, as I mentioned for that matter, that the salespeople who are successful over a period of time are the people who are able to overcome this pressure and are able to plan it. Okay. Now, when I say plan it, it essentially means that um, and when this transition into B2B, I'll talk about this in a bit. Are you able to, and a lot of people for that matter, they put all their eggs in the same basket, right? If that order comes in and it kind of translates them for a win, and if it doesn't, they kind of fail, right? And that is the single biggest failure that everyone does. Over a period of time, 1-2 years down the line, the successful people are able to plan their sales well, plan their quarter in advance. They are able to anticipate whether this will close or not, and they are able to anticipate whether they have enough in their pipeline which would eventually close to lead them to the target, right? Now, this at the end of the day is a job which will have a lot of pressure on you, but that pressure, people who are eventually become successful at it are those type of people who are able to plan their sales really well, which essentially means they're able to backtrack their numbers really well with respect to, if I have to do this closure, how well do I need to start in advance, and how much pipeline do I need to build, and so on and so forth. Right. So there is no, and concluding this by saying that um, there is no running away from sales pressure. Okay. People think for that matter, if I go to company one from company two, you will be away from sales. That is not the case, right? At the end of the day, sales is a job where your numbers speak rather than a lot of other type of roles, right? You get your number, for that matter, you're a superhero. In next quarter, you don't. At the end of the day, you become a villain, right? So that is the reality with sales. And as I mentioned, people who are successful are the people who start planning for it way behind and trying to raise red flags wherever I'm needed.
Right. Thank you for explaining that. So what you're saying is that burnout in sales is very real, and it happens to 6 out of 10 people.
In very early stage, I'll say it will happen to a little more than that.
Okay.
Okay. I would put that number to 7 out of 10 and so on and so forth. We are already seeing this. And as a part of my role, as I mentioned, I talk to a lot of freshers. So talk about this in a while, but that burnout is real. And the burnout is a little more in velocity sales than in a solution sales or another type of sales.
Right. Thank you. I have one more very specific question, Rahul. So this question is from a perspective of someone who has zero sales background. Let's assume an engineering graduate who has no understanding of what sales is. If this person has identified that he's a natural at sales based on the 3 parameters that you shared, the litmus test, if this person has understood this, is confident that he is going to be very good at sales and wants to build a career in sales, what path he can follow to, get into that mainstream industry, and post that it is going to be his results that will grow him. But how does he get into that mainstream industry role wherein he sees opportunities?
Okay. So as you mentioned, right, the first step essentially is first step essentially is to identify whether you're a sales guy or not, right? So if you're passing through that litmus test and you realize, okay, oh, I was able to convince my girlfriend, or I was able to convince my mom, dad, and so on and so forth. Oh, I fit this bracket. Let's quickly jump into the sales role, right? So I don't think that is sufficient. Obviously, that it just means that you qualify, right? So the other thing that you need to do is, obviously, depending upon the stage of career that you are at, you need to figure out what your options are at this point of time. Okay, and your options can be a sales in this type of role, sales in a and I'll be a little specific. For example, in a farming role, whether they are good for hunting, or whether they are good for velocity sales, or whether they are good for field sales, and so on and so forth. Whether they have any language preferences, and so on and so forth. So, for example, if a lot of people, for that matter, are not good at English, they might want to try it out at a local level sales, right? So, which can be Tamil speaking or Telugu speaking, and so on. So once you have identified what type of sales that you would want to do, then the second step essentially is actually go and start preparing for those interviews. And in case you have an option, find your trainings that you would want to do. And this is exactly what we do at Zohort. If you would want, I'd be happy to explain what we do at Zohort at this point. Okay. So at Zohort, what we do is we work with freshers and early professionals. We identify, this is the litmus test which I just mentioned. Once they go through the litmus test, we offer them a 6 to 8 weeks program, 6 weeks of training plus 2 weeks of placement assistance, where they go through the entire program. The program is being designed by, obviously, industry experts. The instructors in the program are people who have been there, done that. There are mentors in the ecosystem who would make sure that they give you one-to-one feedback. Every week, for that matter, you will be given a different topic. You will have to do assignments on that topic. You will have to sit with your mentors, get their assignments exist, and so on. Once people are through the program, we also start preparing them for placements. There are mock interviews. There are mentor sessions, calling sessions, sales pitches, and so on and so forth. Once that is done, we start introducing them to our partner companies who hire from us, and they can obviously start applying on their own also, because they are better prepared at this point of time. Okay, so the focus essentially was B2B SaaS, but when I started off Zohort, I didn't realize this, but a lot of fintech companies, service companies, and everybody who wants to do B2B is now reaching out to me to hire from my cohorts. So when I started this off less than a year, for that matter, about 100 people have graduated from my program and are working in the SaaS companies, which are recently good, CVC funded. I can take a lot of names here: Zohort, MyMocha, Skate, and so on and so forth. About, I think, as far as my number goes, I think 35 odd companies people have. So that is what we do. And I would, to come back to your question, for that matter, I think once you have cool. So I was talking about the kind of work we are doing at Zohort. So as I mentioned, there are decently good companies who are hiring from us, and the one big thing that I've realized is specifically once people kind of have 1 year of experience, they want to transition into B2B because they think that there is a better career out there. And a lot of people have spent some time in edtech, retail sales, pharma sales, hospitality, for that matter, is when people realize this part, and then people are looking out. Unfortunately, companies look at their experience and categorize them as B2C, and they don't even touch them, right? And they very few companies take a bet on them, right? They wouldn't even talk to you. They wouldn't even talk to these guys, right? So they would see in their CV 2 months and Byju's and say thank you so much. But that is not the case, right? So a lot of people. Good thing about sales, and typically B2B sales, is your whatever education, it doesn't matter. We have people doing BTech, done their BTech, done their either MBA, BBA, BCom, hospitality, and so on and so forth, right? So it doesn't matter what education background you're coming from, right? So at Zohort, we don't even have a criteria of education. As long as you're ready to work, you have 3 years of degree behind you. Sometimes not even completed, you can come, no worries, right? We'll try and figure out whether you cover through the litmus test or not, right? And that has kind of something which has worked for us. Now, they go through a lot of tactical skills training. For example, uh, from not selling to doing discovery, right? Not to talking, not it is not about selling, but it is about trying to figure out how your customers would buy. Those type of mindset change happens over a period of 6 to 8 weeks, apart from a lot of tactical things like identifying the target market and so on and so forth. Now, good thing in this particular market, as you would know, is B2B SaaS is growing, right? B2B SaaS is growing like crazy. And pandemic obviously has pushed it because of the digital adoption, right? A lot of companies which were struggling a lot of industries were struggling at the point when the pandemic started, but B2B SaaS in most of the cases was growing, right? So this has kind of pushed the demand specifically for entry-level salespeople in this particular segment. And I speak to a lot of companies, like a lot of companies wanted to hire my entire cohorts. So I told them, look, man, I'm not at this scale. I'm trying to figure things out at this point of time. But a lot of companies are struggling with hiring. And a lot of companies are struggling with onboarding and training them as well.
Right.
So the good thing with Zohort essentially is most of the people who start off their career, they are far ahead than a lot of people who are onboarded as freshers. And a lot of companies actually come back to me saying, a lot of founders have come back to me saying that, the work that you are doing, specifically training them, is really amazing. So a lot of career opportunities in B2B SaaS. And, I would rather want your audiences to go ahead and apply visiting www.zohort.com.
Right. So let's talk about SaaS in general, Rahul. So what do you think entails SaaS, and if you could tell us more about it?
See, I think this question comes a lot, for that matter, to me, and as a part of our orientation, we do educate people with respect to SaaS. Now, a lot of people think that SaaS essentially is B2B SaaS only, but you yourself consume SaaS products in some shape or form as consumer only, and we give those examples, right? Google Gmail is a SaaS product. Google Photos is a SaaS product, right? Even if you're doing a free version of it, using a free version of it, you're consuming those software at the end of the day, right? A lot of people are using Canva these days. A lot of people are using, digital marketers are using SEO products and so on and so forth, right? A lot of this is SaaS at the end of the day. It's just that people are not even aware. Now, there's a different category of SaaS, which is B2B SaaS, and this is where our focus has been. To begin with, for that matter, I definitely tell a lot of people the excitement this industry is carrying. I feel that in 1990s or beginning 1990s, there was a lot of focus on IT services in India, right? So companies like TCS, Tech Mahindra, HCL, and lot of these big companies which now employ lakhs of people came and grew, right? I think SaaS, what IT services was in 1990s, SaaS is in 2020, and I think in next 10 years time, you would see 15-20 decacons coming out of this industry itself. Okay, there are a lot of good companies already, obviously done a lot of headway, but for sure this industry is going to transform India as such. And a lot of people don't know this, but there are about 4,000 startups, more than 4,000 startups in this industry itself, and there's a good ecosystem around it also. So to answer your question, I am really excited about SaaS and what it would do in next 5-10 years. For people who are just starting off their career, this is a really important, specifically B2B SaaS. If they want to start as a career if they want to start their career now, an entry-level sales role essentially is what we call as sales development, which is what we coach people for, which can then transition into account executive and so on and so forth. So to answer your question, coming back to your question, So SaaS essentially has two flavors, which I mentioned. There is a lot of B2C SaaS, but with respect to B2B SaaS, there are a lot of opportunities. And in B2B SaaS, typically, again, there are companies which focus on $20,000, $30,000 deal size to as high as $1 million annual recurring deal size. And this is where a lot of recruitment in sales is happening.
Right. Thank you, Rahul, for sharing that. Rahul, one more thing that I wanted to ask you is, so you of course mentioned about that in sales there would be failures, there would be number pressure. Apart from this, what other challenges do you see in a sales role, and how would you suggest or recommend that people can navigate them?
So see, sales is not a linear journey in most of the cases. Okay. And as I mentioned, the most important part that people, when they're starting off their career, is, and I call this most of the people who want to do really well in sales and who have done really well in sales, they found a mentor very, very quickly. Okay, and you'd ask all the good salespeople for that matter, they would say that this guy coached me, this guy coached me. Most of the salespeople for that matter. And this is where what we are trying to do is also give somebody a mentor. Okay, so you can coach people. You can coach people on the transactional skills, all the transactional skills. What are the various theories of negotiation, right? There's a very, very good, you would find all the YouTube videos talking about Batna and whatnot, so on and so forth, right? And you would have possibly learned them in MBA. But if you are in a situation, how do you react in a situation? What do you do if somebody asks you for a discount, right? What do you do if somebody says, I'm not ready to meet you, but you know that there is a deal out there to be made, right? So what do you do in those situations? What do you say to who? First of all, who do you say to, and then what do you say to these guys? Is not a problem that can be solved with a course.
Right.
It is a problem that you would need a mentor for that matter, specifically for the people who are starting out their career, right? So I encourage most of the people to, in fact, all the Zohort grads for that matter, they come back to me saying, okay, I want to talk to this guy. I'm in this situation. What should I do? I'm not getting enough meetings. What should I do? Or, this customer just came back and said to me this, how do you think I should reply? And so on and so forth, right? So, and this is when I realized that people in the very beginning in their career for that matter, howsoever difficult, howsoever good they are, they need a structured mentor, okay, a sales mentor for that matter, who would possibly help them in the early part of the journey till they are able to figure things on their own, right? So you would go back and you should talk to 10, 15 people, and you would realize that all those people had good mentors in sales. Even I had good mentors in sales. I had more than one for that matter, right? So my suggestion to everyone who is starting off their career is, one, don't hesitate to ask questions, and always lean back and see who your mentor is and who can answer your questions in a very early stages. If you don't ask, people think that everything is going all right.
Right. Wonderfully put. Right. So everyone needs a mentor. Well, I think that's not limited to sales. No matter what you're doing, if you know someone who has transferred that path earlier, it makes sense to get connect with them, understand, because a lot of times the challenges that you're facing, these challenges have already been faced by them, so they can help you.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that
Absolutely.
works well for all. Tell us about your entrepreneurial journey, Rahul. Zohort is about transforming people into sales. You also take people who already have a background in sales and prepare them from a SaaS sales role. You also take up people who have, like you were mentioning, people who have 3-year degree in sales. You also take them and you coach them on sales skills. So tell us more about that, and tell us about your personal entrepreneurship journey, how it has been like.
Interesting. So see, when I started off this by by realizing that people are hiring at HCRs and they're not getting it, right? So I thought this seems to be a real. Spoke to 5-7 founders, few sales leaders, and realized that people are not people are struggling with hiring entry-level sales people. I said, big deal. Let's start a boot camp. That was everybody was doing a boot camp in COVID time, right? I said, let's do a boot camp, right? I started off. I got 15 people somehow. Convinced them to attend the boot camp. I think 6 stuck with me over a period of 8 weeks, and 4 of them got jobs. And the kind of impact was really huge. I mean, one person who was earning, I think, 1.8 lakh, and then moved to 6 lakh with 4 offers, and so on and so forth, right? So there were all 4 people who had like 2 offers each, and this was just first boot camp that I did, right? So this is when I realized, okay, this is something which is really interesting and I can take it up. My entrepreneurial journey actually started with this validation, and I kind of took 3-4 months to just validate it, whether this is something that I can take up and this is something that will have a long-term impact, right? So my journey has been really amazing. As I mentioned, all these learnings, learnings later, but in general, it has been really fulfilling
in terms of impact.
In terms of its impact, right? So in just 6 months, people just calling up saying, "Sir, offer aa gaya," and just telling me ki, the kind of pitch that they have, or the voice that they have, or the message that they do, kind of tells you ki, okay, you have made some type of an impact, right? Okay, somebody's life has changed because of the impact that you did, because of the time that you spent. So on one hand, that has been really fulfilling, but on the second on the second point, the entrepreneurship journey is not just about this, right? So there are highs and there are lows, right? So I have seen my entire cohorts being failed completely end to end, and I have also seen my cohorts being extremely successful. I mean, 100% placement and so on and so forth. I've seen ups and I have seen downs, right? But over a period of time, I think the learnings of this has been 2 or 3 things which I mentioned right at the beginning, right? So one is the awareness about sales roles, specifically in this market, specifically with respect to the freshers or early professionals, that needs to change, and that needs to change really, really drastically. A lot of people are not even focusing on that. A lot of people, most of the edtechs are focusing on fancy jobs, product management, whatever makes them money, to be very honest. But I think the life skill, as I mentioned, sales skill is a life skill, and people who are successful need to be aware about this right at the beginning. On the other hand, my second learning, essentially, which I really, really, really need to change, is there's a lot of bias in hiring salespeople, and that bias is communication bias. Just because someone speaks good English, it doesn't mean he is a good salesperson. A lot of sales leaders realize this, but
Some
when
don't.
they some would. In fact, a lot of salespeople realize it, because they're, at the end of the day, they're salespeople. Right? They realize this. But when they start implementing or hiring, at the end of the day, the hiring is delegated to someone who might not understand this,
Right.
and they have just one mark in saying ki, one benchmark to measure people is whether they were able to communicate well or not, right? So that is something that I think I need to change, and I need to tell people that this is not a benchmark. As we're starting to introduce something called as Zohort scores very, very recently. So people who grad, we have put a full score for that matter, which we will kind of send to companies, at least to educate them that there are better things than communication skills, right? So those are the things that we are trying to do. But this learning, specifically with respect to sales hiring, I think there are a lot of opportunities there, which me as an entrepreneur is really excited about.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you, Rahul, for the wonderful session. What I take away from this discussion is sales is a life skill. Everything that you mentioned, how you negotiate with your girlfriend, with your life partner, with your parents, with your manager, sales is a life skill. Most CEOs are from sales. You mentioned that. You also mentioned that it offers unparalleled, growth opportunities like no other field. Even, when you compare the journey of a good salesperson versus a good tech person, you'll often find that, the tech people might have a head start, but if you do really well in sales, it offers growth like no other field can offer. You also
Yes.
mentioned about SaaS, how it is booming with opportunities, and this is going to be what IT services was in 1990s. So hope this helped everyone, which will help them make more informed decision in sales. Thank you, Rahul, again for taking out time on a Sunday for this wonderful session. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Vaibhav, and I hope your audience enjoys this session and possibly takes something from it. And really, really glad to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rahul. Bye.